Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lord Gord Podcast. This is your host, Lord Gord. I'm giving you information that's factually correct and politically incorrect. And oh, my flame, some things will never change. I still hold your vision in my mind. Say you still love me. So this week, back on topic, I'm talking about the midterm results for California. And spoiler alert, most of the results were not good. If you want to know what I think California will become, listen to my podcast on Hispanic Detroit. I lay out a pretty good argument. Let me just lay down the facts of California. California has the highest poverty rate in the country. It has a third of the nation's welfare recipients, but only 12% of the nation's population. Has the highest income tax in the country. We rank 47th in education. We're in the bottom 10th percentile in infrastructure. We rank dead last in business friendliness. And the list goes on and on and on. We have many counties in this state with worse economic freedom than Detroit. You know, we have these cities like San Francisco that have extremely unaffordable housing prices due to government regulation. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. And 70% of California households can't afford the median price for a home in California. We lose $25 billion to illegal immigration every year. So really listen to Hispanic Detroit to understand just how deep the problems are with California. We also have $1 trillion in debt, $700 billion being to pensions for government workers. So first off, Gavin Newsom won the governorship. This is a guy that wants to double the highest income tax rate in the country. He wants universal health care for illegals. He has really no plan to free up the economy so that businesses can grow, people will invest, so on and so forth. So I'm just going to read a little bit about Gavin Newsom. Unfortunately, he beat John Cox, who I liked. John Cox was a businessman, a Republican, someone with common sense, and he saw how bad the state's run because we're in a one-party state and we're being run by leftists, and leftists destroy everything they touch. Cuba, Communist China, Russia, Venezuela, Cambodia, Detroit, Greece, on and on and on. So let's talk about some of the things Gavin Newsom wants. This is from Leo Hanian's article called The Economic Realities of a Gavin Newsom Governorship. Guaranteed health care for all, a Marshall Plan for affordable housing, a master plan for aging with dignity, a middle-class workforce strategy, a cradle-to-college promise for the next generation, an all-hands approach to ending childhood poverty, put California on a path to 100% renewable energy, double down on the production of organic and sustainable food. Let me translate what he wants here. Guaranteed health care for all, government-run health and having the money confiscated for the purposes of another person, and having the same people that run the horrible education system, our horrible infrastructure, our horrible post office system, so on and so forth, our horrible DMV, have them run your healthcare. Marshall Plan for affordable housing. Really the reason why housing in California is unaffordable is because of regulation, open zone laws, rent control laws which restrict the supply of housing. All these government regulations, historical landmark, this and that, which makes it really hard to build housing. Let me cue Tom Sowell's Housing Boom and Bust here. The facts are that an international study of urban areas with quote-unquote severely unaffordable housing, like San Francisco, LA, New York, so on and so forth, likewise found that 23 out of 26 such areas around the world had strong smart growth policies. Smart growth means that the government, like the Soviet Union, controls what gets built, what doesn't get built, who can build, who can't build, so on and so forth. The consequences contrast painfully with the self-congratulatory phrase. As a former governor of the Reserve Bank of New Zealand put it in another international study of home prices, quote, The affordability of housing is overwhelmingly a function of just one thing: the extent to which governments place artificial restrictions on the supply of residential land. Close quote. Yeah, like in Palo Alto in the whole decade of the 70s, not a single house was built because of government regulation, and the price of a home in Palo Alto quadrupled. One more quote here. Today, a family in an American city without growth management planning can buy a very nice middle manager's home with about 2,200 square feet, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, and a two-car garage for 150,000 to 200,000. In cities that have had smart growth management planning for 10 to 15 years, the same home costs $300,000 to $400,000. In cities that have had it for 25 years or more, the same house costs from 500,000 to as much as 1.5 million. In California, the median house costs over 500,000. So there you go. So literally, you have to increase the supply of housing to to make housing more affordable. Yet nothing he will do that. He'll make it even harder to build housing and invest in real estate. Okay, let's keep going. He wants a master plan for aging with dignity. I don't even know what that means. The best way for someone to age with dignity is for them to have a loving family that will protect them and take care of them into their old age. Not putting them in some government-run housing project or some government-run home in which they're treating us taxpayers like cattle to serve the purposes of someone else. You know, aging with dignity isn't being some spinster, some woman that never marries and has kids and works in some cubicle for 30 years and has no family to take care of her. That's not aging with dignity. But that's what they want it to be. A middle-class workforce strategy, yes. He ranked dead last in friendliness to businesses. Businesses are getting the hell out of California. We have many counties that rank worse in economic freedom than Detroit. We have the highest income tax rate in the country. And all the rules, regulations, and taxes make it extremely unviable for a business to come here and invest. But you have a middle-class workforce strategy. Gavin Newsom, where are these jobs coming from? If people aren't investing, if businesses are leaving, and you're pricing people out of jobs with minimum wage laws, so on and so forth, where are the jobs going to come from? Unless he's going to create government jobs, which means you're just going to enslave a certain part of the population to give their money to someone else, which is what they want to do. I consider people like Gavin Newsom and other leftist slave traders because, one, they want to make people dependent on government. They want to be able to own the heart, minds, and souls of people. And also, they want to use the taxpayers as cattle. They want to enslave people and make people work for the purposes of someone else. They want, if you want to give someone affordable housing and free medical care and free education and all this stuff, that money doesn't come out of nowhere. It is forcefully taken from our pockets and given to people who it does not belong. Period. They're slave traders. That's what communism, socialism is. It's slavery. Anyway, let's see. A cradle to college promise for the next generation. Not knowing that the reason why college is so unaffordable. Well, I think they do know this stuff, but they know that advocating for this stuff and doing this stuff only gets them more power, which is what they want. You know, the reason why college is so unaffordable is because the government's involved. Colleges don't have to compete for pricing because it doesn't matter what they charge. The government will back the loan. They'll get their money regardless of what they charge. It's almost like if you have a husband and wife and the wife says, you know, it doesn't matter how you treat me, I'll stay with you. What's the incentive to treat her well if she will always stay with you no matter how you treat her? So colleges, what's the incentive of keeping costs down? What's the incentive to keep tuition down if you're going to get a guarantee from the government? I don't know. All hands-on approach to ending childhood poverty. Listen to my podcast about the rise of illegitimacy and its consequences. The fact of the matter is that most kids that live in poverty are born out of wedlock. They live in single mother homes. The poverty rate for kids born out of wedlock is 5 times what it is in a married family. The majority of gang members, high school dropouts, teens that get pregnant, so on and so forth, come from single mother homes. Single mothers make up 19% of all American families, but represent 51% of all families in poverty. They receive 59% of food stamps and 90% of TANF benefits. Last time I checked, the California receive welfare were either single mothers or their progeny in child-only cases, which is TANF. So, knowing all that, is his plan to end childhood poverty going to be to stop incentivizing and glorifying single motherhood? Is it going to be to have people, get married before having sexual intercourse and having children? Is it going to be telling people that the way to stay out of poverty is finish high school, get a full-time job, don't marry before you're 20, and don't have a baby out of wedlock? Is that his plan? No. His plan is going to continue with the policies that create the single motherhood, that create the government dependency, and that create the poverty and dysfunction, because these people thrive off of it. I was talking to someone about social workers the other day. I said if family formation patterns went back to the way they were in 1960, I would guess that about 70-80% of social workers wouldn't have a job anymore. When you look at a child above what they are in married households, like childhood poverty, government dependence, school failure, crime, I believe that being born out of wedlock, being raised without the government's going to give you, so that happens as well. So in a nutshell, with a price ceiling, you get increased consumption, you decrease the supply, you decrease the quality. So let's keep reading here. A single-payer proposal requires higher taxes. Some analysts estimate a 37% state sales tax would be required to fund such a program. This would depress the California economy and would lead many businesses and residents to leave the state. Well, people are already leaving the state in record numbers. Businesses are leaving the state. Like I said earlier, California ranks dead last in business friendliness. How are you going to have a thriving economy? How are you going to grow your economy and get people paid and create wealth if you're dead last in being friendly to people who are investing in creating wealth? Anyway, let's keep moving. So here it is. For those wondering about the cost of single-payer systems in other countries, it's important to recognize that much of the allocation of healthcare under those systems is done by rationing. For example, suppose an individual is planning to have a hip replacement. The median waiting time for this operation is 70 weeks in British Columbia. Rationing within single-payer programs does not lower the true cost, which reflects not only how many dollars are spent, but also patient welfare. So like I said earlier, the costs go out of control because prices are not the same as cost. You artificially lower the price, but that's not changing the cost of something. If Toyota is forced to sell a $20,000 car for $10,000, after selling a few thousand cars, they'd be losing hundreds of millions of dollars. They can't do it, so they would just stop supplying the cars, or they'd have to make something of a much lower quality. And a lot of people would not get cars that would usually get cars because they're not supplying the cars anymore. All right, so we talked about Gavin Newsom, all right? We talked about why housing is unaffordable. So I'm going to go through some of these props and just some of the just some quick implications on some of these props. So Prop 1 was an affordable housing bond that authorized $4 billion in general obligation bonds for existing affordable housing programs. Fiscal impact: increased state costs to repay bonds, averaging about $170 million annually over the next 35 years. That was approved. Anytime you hear the word bond, that means taxpayers are going to be enslaved even more. They're going to have their money confiscated. And like I said, the reason why the housing is unaffordable is because of government. Unless they repeal the regulations and they make it easier and less costly to build houses, then you're going to continue to have this problem. So literally, by taxing the public and buying votes by supplying affordable housing to a very small group of people, doesn't help the problem at all. But the moral people of California voted for it. All right. So Prop 2, mental health housing. Amends Mental Health Services Act to fund No Place Like Home, which finances housing for individuals with mental illness. Approved by 61%. Those bonds, the state's using $140 million a year of county mental health funds to repay up to $2 billion in bonds. More tax. Water bond authorizes $8.877 billion in state general obligation bonds for various infrastructure projects. That was rejected. Good, because we have the highest income tax rate in the country. People get taxed out the wazoo here. Governments don't manage anything efficiently, yet people are still giving more power and control to an inefficient bureaucracy, which is government, which pays no price for being wrong. I don't know. And these Californians go to places like Texas and ruin those places too. So, I don't know. Children's bond, Prop 4, Children's Hospital Bond Initiative. authorizing bonds funding construction of hospitals providing children health care, approved by 60%. See, they use these children, especially the children of illegals, as cannon fodder for their government programs. They should have enough money. They tax us enough. They should have enough money. Why are we giving them more money for things that they should have already been doing instead of giving $25 billion to illegals so they can have 100, 200 years of Democrat rule? So even though I like children, I'm for children, I'd much rather help them through voluntary exchange, charity, things like that, than giving an inefficient, wasteful bureaucracy that literally enslaves people, giving them even more money to do jobs that they do so poorly already. Okay? Prop 5 would have removed certain transfer requirements from homeowners over 55. So in other words, people rejected this. By freeing up individuals to make more decisions to benefit themselves, by restricting and removing these government mandates, people voted against it. You know, it was gonna, schools and local governments would lose more than $100 million in property taxes early on, growing to about $1 billion a year. I would have loved that. We're ranked 47th in education. I did a podcast about this. Leftist teachers, leftist press, leftist lies. There's no evidence to suggest that increasing in funding leads to better academic performance. It's one of the biggest lies of our generation. The less money in the hands of these inefficient slave trading bureaucrats that pay no price for being wrong, the better. Yet people don't understand that. They think our prosperity comes from the government, that good education comes from the government. If good education comes from the government, why do almost half of public school teachers in Philadelphia send their kids to private school? 3-4 times the national average. Why, as soon as parents have an opportunity, they send their kid to a charter or a private school? So good. I want these schools to lose money. I want them to actually have to compete in the marketplace and actually have to increase the viability and quality of their product to attract people, instead of having a government-run monopoly that fails the kids and fails the taxpayers. So very disappointed in that. Prop 6 was a gas tax repeal, rejected by 55%. Like I said, our infrastructure is in the bottom 10%, and we still have the highest tax rate in the country. And we've been a high tax and spend, heavy regulated state for a long time, and our infrastructure is still bad. What makes you think that this gas tax is going to make it any better? I can cite evidence upon evidence upon evidence that giving the government more power and more control over these things doesn't make it better. It makes it worse, because they have no incentive to improve. They can always just keep saying, hey, we don't have money, we don't have money, right? And this gas tax, if it got repealed, we would save at least 50 cents at the pump. I know I don't drive nearly as much because the gas is so expensive. And I'm almost certain, I don't know this for sure, but the California bureaucrats probably aren't receiving the kind of revenue that they expected from this tax, because when you tax something, you get less of it. When you subsidize something, you get more of it. So you got these people taxing, thinking, okay, we're going to make this amount of money, but they don't understand that human beings respond to incentives and constraints. People are driving less, okay? And this could affect businesses as well. If people aren't driving as much because the gas is so expensive, maybe they're not going on as many dates, they're not going shopping as much, they're not spending as much money. So this could be affecting businesses negatively as well. You know, but they don't, all they want is power and control, okay? They don't think about these things. Dialysis center regulations would have required rebates and penalties if charges exceeded limits. Rejected by 61%. Good. Government-run healthcare is death. Okay? There's still some fools that think that Cubans have better healthcare than Americans. You would never, ever see an American say, hey man, I'm not going to go to an American doctor. I'm going to go to a Cuban doctor. Not for, surgery for cancer, chemotherapy, hip surgery, anything like that. So, yeah, I'm glad they said no to that regulation, because it would have probably made it even more costly, because if people aren't able to charge what the product's worth, they're going to just stop supplying the product. There's going to be less of it to go around. There's going to be more death and more dysfunction. Prop 10, rent control, would have expanded local government's authority to enact rent control. That was rejected by 62%. Maybe some people in California do have sense. I I see a wide disparity in it because these people are voting for more tax and more regulation in certain areas, but then less regulation in certain other areas. Why don't they understand that this regulation and top-down centralized control makes things worse? I explained that places like New York and San Francisco have had some of the longest, strictest rent control laws in the country. They also have the highest rents in the country. What rent control does is it limits the supply of housing because you're setting a cap on the price of housing, so it limits the supply. Landlords don't have to compete nearly as much for tenants because there's not as much of a supply of housing, so the quality of the housing goes down. And because there's a lower supply of housing overall, more people end up without homes. And also, builders, instead of building homes, they build like luxury condos or luxury business malls. And they build places that are exempt from rent control, so the rent ends up going higher because there's a lower supply and there's higher demand. All right, so some people have some sense. All right. Prop 11, paramedic break time, requires private sector emergency ambulance employees to remain on call during work breaks, eliminate certain employer liability, approved by 60%. I honestly don't know what to feel about that, but I don't like the government imposing cost on people that they pay no price for. I just don't. Prop 12, bigger farm animal cages, establishes minimum requirements for confining certain farm animals, fiscal impact, potential decrease in state income tax revenues from farm businesses, state costs up to $10 million annually to enforce a measure that was approved by 60%. Once again, more regulation. This is one of the most highly taxed and regulated states in the union. We get awful results. People are leaving. Our housing is unaffordable. Our education sucks. Our infrastructure sucks. We don't have any jobs. We have the most welfare recipients than anywhere else, and we have the highest poverty rate in the country. Yet you're putting more regulation and taxes on people. You're going to make it more expensive to farm and create food and produce. You're going to get less food and produce. The prices are going to go up. Who do you think that affects most? Poor people. So like I said, man, California is on its way out, and Lord Gord is saving up his shekels to move to another state. And that's the Lord Gord Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe on iTunes. Subscribe on YouTube. Get the Lord Gord Funk album. This isn't TV. Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Tidal, YouTube, so on and so forth. Next week, I'm going to be breaking down song lyrics. I'm going to do Gigolos Get Lonely Too by The Time. Buckle up for that one. I'm Lord Gord. I'll talk to you next time.